Alright, God bless you all. Hopefully everything's okay with all of you. God bless each one of you. Not going to be fishing today. Today we're going to have a little just sit down and talk. It's been on my mind for a little while, a video that I've been wanting to do. Summertime fishing can be a challenge, but let's be honest, it's probably when 98% of all people that love fishing, that love being outdoors, that's the time of the year that they get out and go. The issue is, to be honest with you, the summertime is probably one of the most challenging. This month that we're getting ready to go up against, at least in the area where I'm at, it's a real challenge because it's August, and August around where I'm at, here in the Kentucky area, it is gets very hot, very humid, stays that way throughout the day. This year I haven't had the opportunity to fish many days when it was raining. Rainy days are probably my favorite time of the summer to go fishing. Now, I'm not saying thunderstorms and all those things, but actual rainy days are probably one of my favorite. One of the things that makes it a challenge is because it is so hot. The number one thing, it really doesn't have to do, but what you have to understand is that fishing, a lot of times we tend to make it a little more complicated than what it is. Fishing a lot of times is just like us, dealing with the fish that we catch, dealing with when you're going after fish, they're a lot like us. It's very basic, very simple. So I'm going to break down to you the 3 baits. Don't focus so much on the baits themselves, as what I'm going to try to get across is the 3 different depth levels that fish can be in, and how to try to be in the most efficient way possible, how to get to a conclusion. Is this what's working today? Is this the pattern? And you need to understand that these 3 depth changes or depth levels can change throughout the day based on water clarity. They can change based on water temperature. They can change based on the weather itself. As far as if it starts raining, then all of a sudden one may work better than the other. But these are the 3 basic things that I usually have in the boat with me, rig set up. This is how I usually attack, trying to figure out right off the bat, because I didn't go fishing yesterday. So Lord willing, day after tomorrow I may get a chance to go. I may go to a different lake. So going to a different lake means that I haven't been around the pattern in a little while. So I'm going to a lake and I'm hoping that I get a bite. How do I do that efficiently within a few amount of hours? In the summertime, I'm not going from daylight to dark fishing all day. I don't have the energy to do that. It gets too hot in the afternoon. I'm usually trying to go early in the morning. I'm usually trying to fish till maybe 12, 1 o'clock. So I've only got about maybe 6 hours to figure out what the fish are doing. This actually may help some of you, because if you fish tournaments, you don't get to get there all the time before daylight. You have to wait till launch till they tell you to go. You have to head back to the ramp whenever your time is to weigh in your fish. So you have to catch everything within a very specific time. So hopefully this little sit down here will help you come to that. Just kind of, I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, and I'm definitely not a professional, but these are just the way that my thought process is throughout the day. So the number 1 bait that I try, and you hear me talk about it a lot, is the topwater. Now you also have to understand that these 3 baits change based on the season that you're in. Just like us. You know, it depends what season that we're in, depending on how people can reach us. You're not going to go up to a person, and this is something that I'm learning even, you know, you're not going to go up to a person in the middle of the summer and say, hey, I want to be friends, here's a cup of coffee. Of course, you wouldn't do that. But if you go up to that same person and say, hey, I've got this cold pop, or I've got this ice glass of water, or this cold bottle of water, here you go, I like to be friends. Then you're probably going to get those people more to listen to you. You're probably going to get those people more. You're going to be a better witness to that person and have a better chance. Well, fish are the exact same way. So early in the mornings, what really I think happens is throughout the night when it's the coolest is when they feed probably the most during the summer. Most largemouth, most smallmouth, even most spotted bass. They're probably going to feed more at night. Why? Because number one, they have cover to their advantage. And this is especially in a clear lake. One that you can probably see 7 or 8 feet deep when you get around the bank clearly. You got a visibility of over 5 feet. They're probably night feeding. And the reason they're doing that, number one, before it got hot, was because the ability to catch the fish or catch the other ones before they feel them. They can react quicker to them. They're designed that way. In the summertime, they're doing that because, remember, the sun is at its highest peak. It's shining down directly on them. They don't really care for the sunlight. They do the same thing in the winter, but the difference in the summer is they will actually come up to the surface. I've heard say it's because of oxygen. I've heard say it's a lot of different things. But the reason why they're going to come up, they are going to come up to the surface. So therefore, a topwater becomes a very important bait, because most of the time, not always, but most of the time, you will catch your bigger fish with a topwater bait, especially in clear water. I believe that it's because when a topwater bait is moving across the surface, a lot of times it's an easier prey because they have it pinned against the surface. It's an element of surprise. They come up and they attack it. There's no way for that bait fish or whatever they're chasing to go any other way. Any other animal that they would be preying upon is pretty much on the surface. Therefore, when they come straight up against it, most of the time they're catching them by surprise. So it's that cat instinct that I'm gonna get you before you know I'm even there. And it shocks us. That's why it gets us so excited, because we're just working our bait through there and pow, you all of a sudden get the reaction of topwater. So my number one thing that I use is usually topwater. Now you have to understand, like I said, this changes throughout the day. Yes, I've caught fish on topwater at 11 o'clock in the afternoon. I've caught them at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I've caught them at all hours of the day. But normally the most successful time is whenever sun is completely out. So the early morning sunrise, throughout the night you can even use different forms of topwater. Early in the morning, usually whenever the sun touches the bank, that's usually when that bank is done with topwater. I've seen them stay up around that bank when there was a foot or two shade on that bank. They'll stay around covered. Now they may stay around wood, they may stay around other things, but for the most part, topwater is going to be over on that specific bank whenever the shade is gone from it. Now what you also have to remember is that the bank that now has shade, they may very well come up a little bit on that bank. I usually haven't had that to happen, but usually when I go into a pocket, what I'll do is I'll fish the side that I know that the sun is going to go away first, or going to hit that bank first, and then I'll go to the other side. That way I get that topwater bite a little bit longer throughout the day. I get that shade coverage a little bit longer throughout the day. So topwater is definitely one of my basic ones. Now if you get there to a bank and there has already been sunlight directly on it and there's not a lot of shade, then I may switch up and I may not even pick up my topwater bait. Another thing I might do as well is if I'm throwing my topwater and I get fish that are blowing up and grabbing the whole bait, then I'll continue throwing the whole bait, the topwater. If I get to a bank and all of a sudden I'm throwing it and it's been 3 or 4 times and I've had fish roll on it, then that usually tells me that, hey, they may not be wanting topwater. Doesn't mean I'm not going to try it again later, but it tells me that, hey, they're not wanting to break the surface. They're still wanting some type of bait fish, which I'm going to throw this little bit in there. I find it very interesting that at the dead of winter, fish switch to bait fish, and in the dead of summer, I believe they also switch back to bait fish. They go back to chasing those little minnows and different things. Not saying you can't catch them on a jig, not saying you can't catch them on Carolina rigs and everything else, but if you look at most of the techniques that are successful during the hot summer time, They're deep cranking a drop shot worm, which is usually a bait fish imitation, whether we realize it or not. Even a jig, a lot of times, I think, resembles probably more when we're leaving it in one spot and we're shaking it. It probably resembles more a bluegill that's struggling on the bottom versus an actual crawdad. So it's just a thought. Like I said, it's just my opinion. It's something that I've been just working with here lately, and I've been very successful because of it. Okay, so top water is definitely what I start on, and based on how they react to this depends on if I go the next bait. Okay, so what is my next bait? Well, here in the last couple years, especially in the last two, my whole thought process has changed. So I used to throw a small little 1/8 ounce or 1/16 ounce weight with some type of Texas rig worm. That was probably one of my favorite things to do, especially if it got hot, okay? Or I threw a jerkbait. And you say, well, how are those even similar to each other? One's a jerkbait and one's a worm with a light weight. How does that even resemble? Well, it's because we talked about the top water, which is the top layer of the surface of water. Now what we're talking about is the middle layer. The middle layer, if it's 10 feet deep, the top is easy. The middle layer is down to about 5 or 6 feet deep from the surface. So that area there, a lot of times, is where the fish are. Sometimes the fish are on a tree, but they're not on the bottom of the base of the tree, and they're not wanting to come up to the top of the tree. So sometimes they're suspended in the tree. So what I'm trying to do is, you can do it. I've already thrown something over top of that tree, and they're not willing to break the surface, but I know there's fish in that tree. So here, what I've done in the last 2 years, ever since I discovered, which I was a slow learner, was the Ned rig. You say, well, man, I'm so tired of hearing about the Ned rig. Everybody talks about the Ned rig. It's an easy bait to use, blah, 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 blah. Well, I like catching fish, and the Ned rig obviously catches fish. Most people that aren't successful with the Ned rig don't fish the Ned rig, and I have a whole nother video talking about just the Ned rig and what actually the way that the man who probably is credited with the Ned rig pretty much coming up with it, or how the technique that he used it, Ned Cady, he always intended it more, or used it more as a middle of the water column bait than he did an actual bottom bouncing bait. Okay, so I've learned to use it more of a suspended fish type of rig, anything in that middle column. So even though it does sink at a reasonable speed, you wouldn't think it does, but this little bitty worm with this little 1/10 ounce head, and I've even got some that I use at the 16th ounce head, it sinks slow enough to where it gives them longer chance to get a reaction. You say, well, how come you don't use a Texas rig versus the little Ned rig? Because I get tired of getting hung up. Well, number one reason that I've learned is you're dealing with fish already that they're not fish that are actively feeding. They're fish that are mouthing to bait to see if that's what they want or not. A lot of times they're not in a full mode bite. Sometimes they are. I've had those moments to where I threw that bait out there that had the Texas rig. They'll mouth it and let go quick enough that so quick that I can't even set the hook that fast. Okay. Sometimes they'll pick it up on those light weights so easily that you don't even feel the bite. So this type of setup with this open hook, I've learned that it actually gives me more of an opportunity to catch those fish. Sometimes they're just little fish. They're not always bigger fish. This little thing right here is a bite producer. It will absolutely get bites when a lot of other baits won't, but I use it specifically for that middle column. Now, if I start throwing this and I don't get a lot of bites, or depending on how they react to this, is going to depend on what other bait I use. So we're still going to stay with that Ned rig, but I'm going to talk to you about a different technique that you still use the same head. All you do is just change the bait that you put on that little Ned rig. And it's something that I've been trying here lately and trying to get better with. But a good friend of mine that goes with me sometimes, taught me a little bit and showed me how to use this, and I was actually pretty successful the last time I went fishing. So I'm going to continue to use this in my arsenal, okay? So this is a spinning rod again. I know a lot of you don't like using them, but once again, I'm trying to deal with fish that are in crystal clear water. I'm trying to deal with fish that are hard to catch anyway. Remember, I'm going to get a bite. That's what I'm going to do. If I get blessed with other things, that's fine, but I'm just going to get a bite. So this is the same little Ned rig head, 1/10 ounce, same size hook. The difference is this little swim bait, okay? Now, when to use a swim bait versus the Ned rig. So the Ned rig itself has no action, so it falls a little quicker than you might believe it would, okay? But a lot of times I'm just reeling it in and I'm shaking my rod tip, not giving it this action, but just shaking my rod tip, quivering it through the water, keeping it suspended in a high, keeping it elevated in a level to where it's in the middle of the water column, okay? So what does this bait do? Well, if I start to notice that as I'm reeling the bait, fish are chasing it, fish are attacking it as I'm reeling it, then I know that they're wanting something moving. I know that they're chasing bait fish. And if they're chasing bait fish, this is one little technique that I've been trying to get better at. And like I said, I was very blessed the other day because I was with somebody that's actually pretty good at it, okay? So started putting this little bitty swim bait on that little rig. Now what I can do is I can throw it out and I can slowly reel and steady it to where it's amazing how they will still, even if they're suspended, I can kind of judge what level they are in the water column, and I could try to keep the bait at that depth. Okay, a lot of people use what's called a spy bait. I've tried them, they're okay. I'm not very good with them, but they work. A lot of people, and I used to, as a jerk bait. The problem is the jerk bait wears me out. The jerk bait also, you can't change the level really where it's at. You can buy different lipped jerk baits and go at different depths, but you're pretty much with a jerk bait, whatever the maximum depth is out of that bait, until you change the line, change all kinds of other things, you're kind of stuck at whatever level it's at. So they either come get it or they don't. With this, I can actually do more than that. I can throw this out, instantly just click my bell, and I can reel this at the very slightly inch or two under the top. Okay, sometimes I can even wake this to trigger a bite. I can slow it down, reel it slow. I can throw it, let it sink beside a log, and then reel it. I can reel it, stop it. There's a lot of little different things that I can do with this little bait. And obviously it triggers a bigger bite from time to time from anything that's chasing bait fish. So this is the bait that I'm going to use to get that middle depth or middle column, okay? So now you're going to say, well, I've done those. You know, I've been out here for like an hour or two. I got there at 6 o'clock in the morning, right when the sun come up. I threw top water for about an hour. It didn't seem like, get me a drink of water. Here's the scenario. I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I went and I threw top water for a little while. They were just rolling on my top water, or I caught a few fish on top water, whichever case it may be. It seems like they've stopped doing that. I've switched over. Another thing that you can do with those two baits, that swim bait and especially on that little one, that swim bait and that Ned rig, something else that I'll include there is you can use them as a follow-up bait to your top water. So sometimes fish will show you on the top water where they are, and then you could turn around and pick your other rod up that you have those other baits and throw right back in the same place. And the theory behind it is they thought they killed it, they're looking for it. So you throw it back in, and you've seen that happen to me a couple times on the videos where I've thrown a follow-up bait back up and they come over and grab it, and you've caught the fish, and there you go. But you've done those 2 or 3 little things, and it just seems like I don't get any bites. The sun's coming up, it's getting a little warmer. I've got a couple more hours. Maybe it's 10 o'clock in the morning. Every day's different. Maybe it's 10 o'clock in the morning and you haven't had a bite at all on all those things, you know. So then what do? Well, we have one piece of water column that usually this time of day you tend to be more successful if you start getting more bottom oriented. It's not necessarily just because it's the bottom of the lake. It doesn't mean that the fish are just laying down there. What it means is that you got to remember, a lot of times you can still fish a bottom bait and never get a bite, because you're fishing a bottom bait in the exact same, and this is something that I had to learn, you're fishing it in the exact same water that you were fishing before. So if you have 3 foot visibility and the sun is up, you know, let's say it's 10 o'clock in the morning and that bank has shade on it, you don't have to go but maybe 10 foot of water next to a tree and get a bite. But if you have clear water to where you can see 8 feet deep, you may have to pull out to 20 feet of water in order to get a bite. Because what we're trying to pull away from is the sun penetration in the water has to come down. Those fish literally feed a lot of times on the edges. They'll fish on the edges of grass. They'll fish on the edge of a tree. If you have a big tree, a lot of times you'll be surprised, and you've also seen me put this to practice before. There'll be a huge tree sticking out in the water. You'll catch maybe a fish or two on the side that's closest to the bank, but you'll be surprised how many times that bigger fish is on the furthest away from the bank part of that tree. So instead of being at the base of the tree, it's over here on these branches that are right at the edge. They, a lot of times, you use that edge because of that predator mentality of, as soon as something comes by, I'm gonna jump out and grab it. They're big time opportunistic feeders. Smallmouth and spotted bass tend to be a little bit different. They still do that, but spotted bass and smallmouth tend to be more of pack hunters, tend to be more of, there's a bunch of us out here, we're just going to go attack that school of bait. Smallmouth tend to be roamers, looking on the bottom because they're more crawdad feeders, but they'll also chase bait and stuff too. So you have to do little things here and there in order to get that, but you may have to back away from the bank. I'm not saying you have to go, everybody always says, oh well, it's 100 degrees and let's just go to 50 foot of water. Well, it's harder to fish than you think. Okay, you really need the right gear, you really need the right equipment on your boat, you need to know a little bit about the lake. You're going to get discouraged and depressed a lot if it's all what you do automatically. My suggestion is to take it little by little. Go to points that you know that are successful, that you've had success on before. Pull back from those points 20 feet further than when you usually put up on that bank. So if you usually sit 40 foot from the bank, sit 50 foot, 60 foot from the bank. Throw back out. You're like, well, but I can't reach the bank. That's the point. The point is you're now going to fish that bait a little bit, and instead of just fishing it the first 10 feet and bringing it all the way back in, bring it the whole distance to the bottom. Now, this is where I'm going to show you another technique which you show me, or you see me use a lot of times. A lot of you don't like to use it. A lot of you just learning how to use it. It's the drop shot. Just a little hook, little weight at the bottom, and you can look all over the internet about everything there is to know about the drop shot. Okay. Most of the time you don't have to, but most of the time it's a spinning outfit. This one here is a 7'2" specific. It's a Shimano rod specifically for drop shotting. Crucial is the design of this rod, but it's a as long as you have any type of spinning rod, it doesn't have to say drop shot, but if it's at least a medium action rod, my suggestion for a drop shot is at least from 6'10". I've used a 6'6", but 6'10" to probably 7'2" is my distance. Any of those they'll work fine. You want a extra fast tip on it usually, or a modern type tip. You want something that has some bend in that tip either way. You do need a little bit of backbone to drive the hook, but you want something to have a softer tip. Why? Because you want the fish to be able to absorb. Now, here's what you got to think of, okay? Wished I'd have brought a bait out here to show you so that you have a little better visual. We'll do this though, just for the time being. We'll do this just so you get an idea. We'll take this little Ned rig off of this Ned rig setup here, and we'll use this Ned rig as our example. Okay, we're going to take our little weight off of here too. Okay, so we're going to talk about now, all we're going to do is just nose hook it, because we're just doing it for as an example. So there we have a drop shot. Okay, why do you want a softer tip rod, and why does this matter so much? So the further away from you are from the bank, you want it to be and stay on the bottom. The reason you want it on the bottom is because you've already established, to the best of your knowledge, is that the top and the middle, they've quit. So you want to get active feeders that are on the bottom. Therefore, this technique is awesome for the bottom because it's got a weight, and that weight changes depending on what you're going to use. But you're going to take that weight and you're going to put it, you want to keep it on the bottom. So a lot of times what you're doing is you're dragging your weight, okay, on the bottom, while this is sitting there dangling around. The reason you need this soft rod, and a lot of people don't understand this, you're going to see all kinds of videos, everybody's reason why you need whatever rod. When a fish comes up to grab this bait, if your rod is too stiff, when they come up to grab it, they're not going to be able to absorb this bait the way they need to. It's the same thought as behind a crankbait. They're not going to be able to absorb this into their mouth because the line's too stiff. The easiness, that rod tip being soft gives them the opportunity to bend. Remember, this line is straight because you got it to you. It gives it the ability to bend that rod and lets them absorb this into their mouth. They're not grabbing it, okay? They're not attacking this. A lot of times all they're doing is they're just sucking this in like a crankbait, okay? So the rod bends a little bit on its own. The rod becomes a strike indicator a lot of times, and we don't even realize it, okay? So you want it to have that softer tip so that it draws it in, but then you still want it to have a backbone to where it will push this hook up into the roof of their mouth as they pull away. This becomes the bait that I use more than anything because of the exact same principles that I've told you about everything else. I love throwing a jig. A jig, you can throw it out, you can bounce it in the bottom, they'll grab it, they'll hold on to it. You've got a split second to jerk, hook, set the hook and get back in. But I've ran into a lot here lately, a lot of pressured fish that won't hold on to the bait, that they'll pick up the bait and spit it back just as soon as they've picked it up. A lot of that, I believe, is pressured fish, and the further you go on in the summer, the further you're going to encounter fish that have already been caught, that have already been took to the boat who knows how many times. The smaller the lake, the more the fish have been took to the boat by somebody. Somebody has caught them. The thought that we have that, oh, I came out here and I caught these fish nobody else has caught in a while, I'm sorry, but that probably doesn't exist anymore in our time. There's so many people that fish at these lakes. How many times have you pulled a bass in and you see 4 or 5 different places where they've hooked them? How many times have you seen, there's one in the town where I live in, where there's a little lake that sometimes there's 10 to 12 boats because they're having a little tournament. Why? Because they like to go home and brag about their little tournament that they went and fished at and they caught some fish. But what have they done? Every fish in the lake's probably got sore mouth. 3-4 times as many. They have the freedom to do that. All I'm saying is there's more pressure on the bass in our lakes now than there ever has been. You go to a place like Cumberland or Wood Creek, I'll give you the credit that maybe not as much fish have been caught. There's some of those smallmouth, maybe they haven't been caught this year. I don't know. But this is the technique that I use, this drop shot, when it's towards the afternoon. Can you do this with any other baits? Sure you can. You can do whatever you want to do. If you want to go out and take a crankbait and throw it from morning to dark, I've done it, you can do it. I wasn't very successful throughout the whole day. When I started to develop this system, when I started to develop this way of doing things, I started being a lot more successful throughout the day. It also kind of changed it up for my shoulders. I wasn't doing the same action all day. I started having fun because I like learning and doing things with different techniques. To me, I'm there to have a good time and to have just enjoy the day and the beauty of everything around me, but also like to catch fish. I don't care how big they are. I just like to try to learn and catch the fish and do what I can. Every now and then I run into a big fish, and I praise the Lord for that. But anyway, I've been wanting to do this for a while because I know that a lot of people struggle going in the summertime, and I used to as well. And I never could figure out, man, they must just not be biting the topwater today. And I threw it all day long all the way up to the evening. I guess that's why I didn't catch a fish today. Or I'd go out and say, man, I threw that drop shot all morning and I didn't catch them until the afternoon. Well, little by little, I started dividing everything up. And there's days that I get there that I don't even start with the topwater. There's days that I just realize that, man, it's dead calm out here. There's nothing going on. I guess I'm going to go straight to the Ned rig. And sure enough, right off the bat, I start catching fish and I never pick up the topwater. There's different ways you can do it all day long, but only you will know. Guess what? If you get there in the morning and the wind picks up and it's blowing wide open and, you know, it starts to drizzle and it starts to rain and all this, what are you going to do? I'm probably not going to throw the Ned rig that day. I'm probably not going to pick up a drop shot that day. I'm probably not even gonna, I may pick up the topwater, but it depends. I may totally switch and pick up a crankbait or spinnerbait. Why? Because those are awesome conditions to be using those type of baits. But when you get up in the morning and you go out and there's no wind, it's high blue skies, then my train of thought switches over. My train of thought switches over. And what do? I start going into these modes that I'm showing you right here because I just want to catch a fish today. So anyway, I hope this helps you. Hope this is a blessing to you. Anybody have any questions, anything? Anybody have any prayer requests? I've been praying for everybody that sent me those requests. I know the Lord Jesus has heard them way before you've even asked. I'm thankful to know Jesus. I'm thankful that we have somebody that we can call on and we can depend on. I know a lot of times we get overwhelmed with a lot of things in life, and to some of us, fishing is just a little escape from all that. It's a little something, a little break from the real world. So that's why I try my best to share what the Lord's taught me and what I've learned about fishing a little bit, so that you can have the same blessings. So anything that maybe you didn't understand, something you had questions about, you're more welcome to message me. I'll try my best to help you. If not, then God bless you all. You all have a wonderful day. Hopefully this video wasn't too long. Don't forget though, Jesus loves you. Y'all have a good day.